If you know anything about the channel, you know we love bleeding edge technologies, but do we? What does bleeding edge even mean? And what makes a technology more bloody than another? What does it mean for a technology to be bleeding edge and risky? And how do we make considerations around the bleeding edges of different technologies to make the best decisions for our teams, our code bases, and our businesses? I want to talk a bit about this, both the definition of bleeding edge and how we can learn from that to build better things with the tools that we have. So let's talk about it. Bleeding edge is often the term people use to describe the stuff that's one step past what they're comfortable adopting, which means to everyone, it means something kind of different. I'm going to propose a very specific definition here. Bleeding edge is technologies that we are not sure will have meaningful adoption in the future. The reason I think it's important to make a distinction like this is I think there's a huge difference between tools like React Server Components and Next versus tools like SvelteKit or Solid Start. I'd even argue there's a granular spectrum here where certain technologies are significantly more likely to grow and maintain massive adoption. And while I understand hesitation in trying new things like server components, I think there is a massive difference between somebody adopting the new server component patterns versus somebody adopting SvelteKit or Solid Start. The difference being that these new patterns are part of something that's already the incumbent. It's already the winner, the growing solution, the big solution, and is not going anywhere. Even if the new pieces that you're betting on aren't necessarily going to be the exact shape things end up in, you're still betting on stuff that has a backing. To put it frank, those bets are much more responsible. And when you're betting on bleeding edge stuff, you have to be careful about what you do and don't adopt. And you have to be really considerate about why you're making these bets. When you bet on React and the stuff that's going on in the React community, you're not making a really risky bet. And that's okay. If anything, it's probably a good thing. And it's incredibly frustrating to get in a conversation with somebody that is treating a brand new framework someone made for fun as the same tier as server components because, oh, I don't like trying all that risky new stuff. The risk isn't in the thing might be broken when you adopt it and now all your shit falls apart. The risk is where's that thing going to be next year? Realistically, the React ecosystem will be here next year, and it will be here in 10 years, and it'll be here in 20 years, the same way we can't get rid of PHP or jQuery. There is no guarantee that SvelteKit or Solid Start will get to the point where they are the next jQuery. As long as you bet on things that reasonably can't go anywhere, those bets aren't that risky. They're actually quite responsible. And this is why I think it's fine and actually good to push stuff like server components. It's also why you might have noticed I'm not talking as much about stuff like Solid and Bling and Astro and all these other fun new things. As much as I love these fun new things, the beauty of server components is it takes a lot of those fun parts and puts them on the surefire path to victory. And I like making bets on technologies that I know will be here next year. Bleed responsibly, to me, means betting on things that are exciting, but doing it when you think they're going to go somewhere and have reasonable reason to believe they're not going to fall apart on the way there. And I'm not saying Solid or Astro or Svelte or Quick or all these things are bad or that any of them are going to fail. I'm saying we're not guaranteed their success, and we have no guarantee of where they will be in 5 years. It doesn't mean don't use them. It just means be very, very careful if you use them for code you want to be able to maintain in 5 years. The React ecosystem has had incredible backwards compatibility from day one. Next has had incredible compatibility since day one. You can use code from these ancient versions of these things and it still works. There are also certain places in your code base where adopting something bleeding edge might not be as risky. As crazy as it might sound, your API layer is kind of one of those, where before something like tRPC existed, you would write a function, put it on an endpoint, be it GraphQL or REST, and then call it from the client. tRPC isn't obfuscating that. It isn't forcing you to use this new pattern that you'd have to spend a bunch of time ripping out after. It's a different way to call those functions. So despite it being new and kind of bleeding edge, the surface area of risk it introduces is really small. Realistically, if tRPC wasn't being maintained or wasn't going in the direction I needed it to, or was falling apart, I could keep it up and running myself reasonably well, and I could gut it for something else reasonably quick. That power is why that bet isn't too irresponsible for me. Databases are a whole different category though, where our data is important. So betting on something really crazy and new like EdgeDB might be fun and exciting, but it probably isn't the best bet for our business, where something like PlanetScale, although it's a new company building on old, boring open source technology, MySQL and Vitess. And I know at any point I can MySQL dump my data out of that and put it somewhere else. Those powers are what make these bleeding edge technologies a lot less bloody and a lot more responsible for us to adopt. And I would really encourage you, when looking at these technologies, you don't just think, oh, it's new, so it's bleeding edge. Rather, you look at what it does, the scope of its impact, and how likely it is to be here in 5 years, and use that information to start the conversation and then eventually come to a decision. Because God, I am so tired of people pretending that tRPC, EdgeDB, and flavor of the week JavaScript framework are equally bleeding edge and equally risky, because all of those exist in entirely different tiers of risk. Please be responsible the way that you bleed, and please understand that when I talk about fun new technologies, I'm not saying you should go rewrite everything in them. I'm saying this is a fun new thing. Feels like I need a new term for the bleeding edge stuff that we're not certain about yet, because it's very different from being on the bloodiest edge of something that will be here next year. Sorry if I'm a little heated on this one. I'm just really tired of how many of these conversations write off incredible technologies using a term to describe things we have no certainty of yet. Please be responsible in our conversations about bleeding edge stuff. It's so important to make good bets as technical leaders. And I like to think a lot of the people here either are or are set up to eventually become strong technical leaders. If you want to learn more about my takes on technical leadership, I have a whole talk dedicated to that there. Definitely watch it if you haven't already. Thank you guys as always. Peace, nerds.